This month we're going to discuss verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. This is the last in a series of 4 verses that are specifically about ego. What Bhagavan teaches us in this verse is a very, very radical idea, which many people, well, naturally most people won't be willing to accept it, but it's an idea Bhagavan wrote Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu for people who are really serious about eradicating ego. And in order to be serious about eradicating ego, we have to be ready to accept what is the nature of ego, and but the ego is the root of everything. So that's what Bhagavan is teaching us in this verse. The basic idea in this verse is expressed by him in other places. For example, in the 5th paragraph of ṇaṇa, in the last few sentences, he says, Manadil tondrum ninevugul elavatrikum nānenum ninevei mudal ninevu. That means, of all the thoughts that appear or arise in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. The first thought, mudal ninevu, means that's the primal, basic, original, or causal thought. Mudal has many implications. It means, as I said, it means first, it means what comes originally, and it's what causes everything else. When he says it causes, it's the primal thought, the causal thought, we have to bear in mind what he says in the previous paragraph, which is that the world is nothing but thought. So all phenomena, according to Bhagavan, are thoughts. Thought, in the sense Bhagavan uses it, he doesn't use it in the narrow sense in which the term is usually used. People usually consider the mental chatter going on in their mind to be thoughts, but Bhagavan uses the term thought in the sense of mental phenomenon. So all types of mental phenomenon are thoughts, according to Bhagavan's meaning, the sense in which Bhagavan uses the word. Since all phenomena are mental phenomena, all phenomena are thoughts. That's why Bhagavan says all phenomena are thoughts. So when he says that the thought called I, which is another term for ego, is the original thought, that means it's the origin of all phenomena. All phenomena appear only because this ego, the thought called I, appears. This he makes very clear in the next sentence. He says, only after this arises do other thoughts arise. In Tamil, that is idu. Idu means this. It's referring to this first thought, this original thought I. Idu arinda pirahe enia ninevugul erukindrana. Only after this arises, other thoughts arise. And then he says in the next sentence, he says the same thing but in using different terms. Tanmei tondria pirahe munile Padacchēdam tondru kindrana. That means only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. First person means I, the ego, the primal thought called I. Second and third persons mean all other things. In other words, all phenomena. So only after the ego appears do phenomena, or all phenomena appear. Everything else appears only after the ego appears. And then in the final sentence he says, Tanmai indri munile Padacchēdam ira. Without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. This, in a nutshell, is the same idea that he expresses in verse 26 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. He also expresses this in several other verses of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. For example, in verse 9, he says dyads and triads exist by always holding on to or depending on one thing. That, though he doesn't specify it there, but one thing he's referring to there is ego. So all dyads means all pairs of opposites. Triads means the three factors of awareness of other things, that is, of transitive knowledge, we could call it. That's knowledge that involves a subject and an object. The three factors are the perceiver, the subject, the perceived, the objects, and the perceiving, that is, the act of perceiving. So these three and all pairs of opposites exist only by holding on to the one, only by depending on ego. All these three exist. Ego is obviously the perceiver, the subject. So everything that is perceived and the very act of perceiving depends on the perceiver, the ego. Again, in verse 14, he says, if the first person exists, second and third persons will exist. First person, again, this is ego. Second and third persons means everything else. And then he says, if one's self-investigating the reality of the first person ceases to exist, second and third persons coming to an end, the nature that shines as one, alone is oneself, the state of oneself. It's a little bit of a complicated sentence, this, but if we break it up a little, what he implies is if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, the first person will cease to exist. That is, if we investigate what is the reality of the first person. First person is ego, ourself, this I. The reality of it is our real nature. So if we investigate our real nature, this ego will cease. If we investigate what we actually are, this ego will cease to exist, and second and third persons will cease to exist along with it. And what then remains as one, undivided by as these three, first person, second person, third person, what then remains as one, that is the real nature of ourself. So these are all pointing to the fact that everything, all phenomena exist only because ego seems to exist. If we investigate ego, ego will cease to exist, therefore phenomena will cease to exist. So this is a recurrent theme in Bhagavan's teachings, but in this verse 26, he says it particularly emphatically and without unequivocally. He says, in the first sentence, he says, in the first sentence of verse 26, that is, this is the main verse we're dealing with now. If ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. And in the next sentence says, if ego does not exist, everything does not exist. That means everything depends for its semi-existence upon the semi-existence of ourself as ego. That is what we have to infer from this. It's very important to read this verse. The previous verse, verse 25, which we talked about last month, that has to be read along with this, because if we don't consider what he says here, in fact, actually the same idea he also said in verse 23, the first verse in this series, because in verse 23 he says, after one thing I rises, everything rises. So these are very important ideas and key to understanding what he says in verse 25. Because in verse 25, he talks about the ego, which he calls a formless phantom, and he says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. When he says this, if we take this verse out of the context of the verse 23 and 26 and other verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, we can easily infer that forms, that's phenomena, exist independent of ego. But ego comes into existence by grasping pre-existing forms. But when we read verse 25 along with verse 26, it's clear forms don't exist independent of ego. Only if ego comes into existence, everything, that means all forms, all phenomena come into existence. So this is crucial to understanding Bhagavan's teachings, what he says in these two verses, verse 25 and 26. Because in 25 we can understand, but it's only by grasping form, that's grasping phenomena, being aware of things other than ourselves, but we come into existence as ego. And by continuing to be aware of other things, we continue to our seeming existence as ego persists. And by grasping and feeding on form, right, that is by our attention to and our awareness of phenomena, that is what is feeding and sustaining ego. And as soon as ego leaves one form, it grasps another form. But the vital clue he gives us the essential clue he gives us in verse 25, if we seek it, if ego seeks itself, it will take flight. Tedinal otum pidicum. That literally means if sought, it takes flight. This is a very, very important principle Bhagavan teaches in verse 25. That is, we seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to other things. If we attend to ourselves, this ego will dissolve and disappear. This is the vital clue that Bhagavan gives us, and this is the key to the whole of Bhagavan's teachings. But these phenomena, they don't exist independent of ego. By rising as ego, we automatically project and perceive forms, phenomena, all other things. But though we talk about projecting and perceiving, they're actually one and the same thing. Because we project forms, or we create forms, we create phenomena by projecting them in our awareness. So our projecting them and our being aware of them are one and the same thing. In other words, projection and perception are one and the same. It's not two separate actions. First project and then perceive. It's one and the same action. That is why Bhagavan's teaching is what is called drishti shrishti vada. That is, creation is a result of perception. The very act of perceiving is creating. So all phenomena seem to exist only because we perceive them, only because we see them. That's why Bhagavan begins Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu with the phrase, because we see the world. The world seems to exist only because we perceive it. So now I'll begin to go through verse 26 in a little bit more detail. In the first sentence, he says, ahandai-y-ē, aṉaittum uṇḍāhum. That means if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. In this context, everything means all phenomena, everything that appears and disappears, everything other than our real nature, which is pure, unchanging, immutable self-awareness. So all phenomena, everything other than ourselves, comes into existence only if ego comes into existence. What is ego? It is ourself who, ego is not an object, ego is the subject. So it's we ourselves who come into existence as ego, or seemingly, it's all seeming, none of this is real, but we seem to come in, because we seem to come into existence as ego, the perceiver, the subject, all other things seem to exist. In the Kalivemba version of this verse, Bhagavan extended this first sentence by adding before it a relative clause to describe ego. That relative clause is karuvam. That's made up of two words, karu and am. Am means which is. Karu means embryo, womb, efficient cause, inner substance or foundation. This karu is a Tamil word, but it's derived from the Sanskrit word garbha, which means, the exact meaning of garbha depends on the context. It can mean womb, it can also mean embryo, fetus, what is interior, inside or center. But in Tamil, it also means it's also used in the sense of the Tamil word karu is also used in the sense of cause, in the sense of efficient cause. That's the active cause, as it were, because in Indian philosophy, different causes are distinguished. For example, for a pot, when an earthen pot is made, the mud is one type of cause. It's what's called the substantial cause. The substance of which the pot is made is clay. So without clay, there would be no pot. But there also has to be an efficient cause. That efficient cause is the potter, the person who actually shapes the clay into the form of a pot. And then there's also a third type of cause which is classified, which is the auxiliary or instrumental causes. Like in the case of a potter, he needs his potter's wheel. Without the potter's wheel, it's a bit difficult to make a well-shaped pot. So he uses certain instruments. Or in the case of a carpenter, for example, wood is the substantial cause, carpenter is the efficient cause, the nimitta karana, and his tools are the instrumental causes. So the crucial, in this context, the crucial cause is the nimitta karana, the one who actually brings it about. So when karu is used in this sense of efficient cause, the nimitta karana, the substance of which all things are made is the ultimate substance of all things is pure awareness. But ego is the efficient cause. Karu can also mean the inner substance or foundation of something. So by saying that ego is karu, Bhagavan implies that it is the embryo that develops into everything else, the womb from which everything is born, the efficient cause that creates or produces everything, the inner substance of all phenomena, and the foundation on which they all appear. So much meaning is packed in this little word karu, which Bhagavan added in the Kalivemba version. So if we take this sentence in the Kalivemba version, it is karuvam ahandai-y-ē aṉaittum. If ego, which is the karu, the embryo, the cause, the efficient cause, the inner substance, comes into existence, everything comes into existence. Then in the next sentence, he said the other side of the same coin. Ahandai-y-ē. If ego does not exist, everything does not exist. That is, other things, nothing. As he says in the 7th paragraph of Nana, Yatatamai Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means what actually exists is only Atmaswarupa. Atmaswarupa means the real nature of oneself, our own real nature, which as he explains in many other places, is just pure awareness. That alone actually exists. So both the ego and everything else, they don't actually exist, they only seem to exist. But so we have to understand it in that sense. When he says if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. He's not intending us to understand that ego actually exists or that phenomena actually exist. They merely seem to exist. So when we seem to be ego, phenomena seem to exist. When we don't seem to be ego, nothing else seems to exist. It doesn't exist at all. Why this is the case? Because all phenomena, all other things, seem to exist only in the view of ego. And hence, without ego, nothing exists. That's why we will all accept that in sleep, no phenomena appear. We are not aware of any phenomena in sleep. Bhagavan says, in sleep, no phenomena exist at all. This is something very, very radical that many people find difficult to accept. But if we're serious about following Bhagavan's path, about going deep into the path that he's shown us, we have to be ready to accept all phenomena seem to exist only when we see them. So in sleep, there are no phenomena. There's no body, no world, nothing. So it all seems to exist only in the view of ourself as ego. And because all phenomena seem to exist only in the view of ourself as ego, when ego isn't there, as in sleep, there are no phenomena. This is what I say, this is a very, very radical teaching of Bhagavan's, but it's very important to grasp this if we want to go deep into following his teachings. Then in the third sentence of this verse, he says, ahandai-y-ē yāvumā. Ego itself is everything. This, to understand this, that link, that word, extra clause that he added in the Kalivemba version, karuvam, is a help to understand this, because karu means the embryo, that from which everything springs. So, as Bhagavan says in ṇaṇa, all phenomena are thoughts. They're all phenomena, mental phenomena. So the mind is nothing but thoughts. But of all the thoughts in the mind, the origin of the mind, the root of the mind, the foundation of the mind is this ego, the first thought called I. So the substance of which all phenomena are made is the immediate substance is ego. People often say, oh, everything is awareness. And they think, but that's a very superficial analysis. Bhagavan makes a deeper analysis. Everything is only thoughts. Thoughts, the substance which appears as thoughts is mind. The essence of the mind is ego. So in effect, all that is seen is only ego. In the Upanishads, it is said, everything is Brahman. That is true, but it's not analyzing it so deeply, because Brahman is the ultimate substance. Even ego, if we investigate it, is nothing but Brahman. Just like if we look very carefully at an illusory snake, we see that it's just a rope. If we look very carefully ourselves, this ego, we will see that we are just Brahman, Atmasvarupa, pure awareness. So the ultimate substance of all things is only pure awareness. But the immediate substance of all phenomena is ego. Ego is what Bhagavan often called sutarivu. That means transitive awareness. Transitive awareness means awareness that is aware of things other than itself. Awareness that is aware of objects, of thought, of phenomena. So though ego is a form of awareness, it is not pure awareness. It's the awareness that is always aware of. The very nature of ego is to be aware of things other than itself. It is never aware of itself as it's aware of itself. It's where I am, but it's not aware of itself as it actually is, because as Bhagavan explained, ego is nothing but the false self-awareness. I am this body. Pure awareness is pure self-awareness. That's just I am, without any adjuncts. But I am this body is ego. That is the adjunct mixed self-awareness is ego. So ego never exists without being aware of phenomena and without being aware of itself as one among those phenomena or a set among those phenomena, this body. And when Bhagavan uses the term body, he's including all the five sheaves. That is the physical form, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. These five all together, because we never experience any of these without the other. So these five collectively Bhagavan calls body. So body means all the adjuncts that we take to be ourself is what Bhagavan calls body. So ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. This false awareness, I am this body, is the substance that appears as all these phenomena. Without ego, none of these things seem to exist. So that's why Bhagavan says here, ahandai-y-ē yāvumā. Ego itself, or ego alone, is everything. Ahandai means ego. Ahandai is a Tamil word, or it's a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word ahanta. Ahanta literally means I-ness. But it's the term Bhagavan, sometimes Bhagavan uses the term ahankara, which also means ego, but more commonly he uses this simple Tamil term ahandai, which is, as I say, it's a word of Sanskrit origin. So ahandai means ego. The A on the end of it, ahandai-y-ē, that A is what is called an intensifier. So it implies here ego alone, or ego itself, is everything. So nothing exists separate from ego. Ego is the substance which appears as all other things. Then in the final sentence he says, ādalāl, yādu eṇḍṟu nādalē, ōvudal, yāvum, eṉṭṛu. Therefore, know that investigating what this is alone is giving up everything. Here, idu is referring to ego. Yādu, what is this? Yādu eṇḍṛu nādalē means investigating what this is. That alone is giving up everything. Why is that? Because as he explained in the previous sentence, if we investigate this ego seems to exist only when it's a grasping form, only when it's attending to things other than itself. When it tries to attend to itself, because the ego is not a form, it's a formless phantom, he says in that previous verse. So when it, instead of grasping form, instead of grasping phenomena, if it tries to grasp itself, it's got nothing to hold on to, so it subsides and dissolves back into its source. When ego dissolves back into its source, as a result of self-investigation, everything else also dissolves back into its source, because it all seems to exist only in the view of ego. So in the absence of ego, nothing else exists. If we investigate ego, ego will cease to exist. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Bhagavan described his path both as the path of self-investigation and as the path of self-surrender. The Tamil, Bhagavan often used the Sanskrit term for self-investigation, which is atma-vichara, but he also often used a simple Tamil term, which means exactly the same, ṭṛaṇaittum. That nātum is a verb that means investigation, scrutiny, it also can mean attention. So ṭṛaṇaittum means self-investigation, self-scrutiny, self-attention, self-attentiveness. That verb, that noun nātum, derives from this verb nādu, or as a verbal noun, it's nādal. So it's the same word. So when he says nādalē, he's meaning investigating. Know that investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So when we withdraw our attention from all other things and turn it back towards ourselves, we are giving up all other things. And if we turn our attention towards ourselves keenly enough, this ego will dissolve. What will remain is what always exists, which is our real nature. And the ego will have ceased to exist because we've seen what we act. Ego is nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. So long as we mistake ourselves to be body, we who mistake ourselves to be this body are ego. But if we investigate ourselves keenly enough and see that we are just pure awareness, we can never again mistake ourselves to be something else. If we mistake a rope to be a snake, the only way to get rid of that snake is to look at it very carefully. If we look at it carefully enough to see that it's a rope, then the idea that it's a snake is removed. The belief that it's a snake is removed once and for all. We will no longer be afraid of it because we've seen very clearly that it's just a rope. So likewise, if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, if we look at ourselves keenly enough, if we investigate what is this ego, look at it so keenly to see what it actually is, we will see what it actually is just pure awareness. When we recognize ourselves to be just pure awareness, we can no longer mistake ourselves to be body. And because we can no longer mistake ourselves to be body, we can no longer perceive phenomena. So investigating what we are is giving up everything. So in other words, self-investigation is the culmination of the climax of the path of self-surrender. Our surrender can become complete. We can give up everything else and also ourself, this ego, only by investigating what we actually are. So ultimately, the path of surrender can be complete, can be complete, can reach its culmination only by self-investigation. So ultimately, self-investigation and self-surrender are one and the same path. That's it. Ultimately, we cannot investigate ourselves without surrender, because to the extent that we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are letting go of other things. So we are, to that extent, surrendering, giving up other things. And to the extent we turn our attention towards ourselves, this ego is also losing its hold. It's dissolving back into its source. So to the extent we investigate ourselves, we are also giving up ego. So we cannot investigate ourselves without surrendering ourselves. We can, to a certain extent, surrender. We cannot surrender ourselves. We can surrender our likes, our dislikes, our desires, our hopes, our fears, and all these things. In other words, we can surrender our will to a certain extent without self-investigation. People who are following the path of devotion, of dualistic devotion, they want to surrender everything to God. So their prayer is, not my will, your will. Your will, thy will be done. Bhagavan has sung like this also in Arunachalam and other places. Your ninishtum enishtum, imbadaku. Your will is my will. That is happiness for me. So this is, we can surrender to some extent. That is, we can surrender our likes and our dislikes and our desires and attachments and so on, to some extent, without coming to this path of self-investigation. But in order to complete our surrender, firstly, so long as ego exists, we cannot be completely free of desires, attachments, likes, dislikes, hopes, fears. These are inevitable so long as ego is there. So we can only, to a certain extent, give up these without giving up ego. So we can follow the path of self-surrender to a certain extent without self-investigation. But we cannot complete the path of self-surrender without self-investigation. That's why Bhagavan says, investigating what it is, investigating what this ego is, that alone is giving up everything. So it's a very, this is as I say, this is the fourth of a series of 4 verses in which Bhagavan particularly talks about ego, and he concludes it by saying, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So this is the conclusion of these 4 very, very important verses. We can say in a sense that these 4 verses are the very heart of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What he says in these 4 verses, he also says, all the other verses are pointing towards this, but this is the very essence of the message of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, what he says in these 4 verses, particularly verse 25 and 26, the last 2 of these 4. Because in verse 25, he explains what is possibly the very key to his teaching. I mean, the most crucial principle of his teaching. But ego seems to exist by grasping form. That's by attending to other things. If it tries to attend to itself, it will cease to exist. So that is all I want to say about this verse today. So if you've got any questions, either about this or any other subject.
So the last sentence he says it is giving up everything, right? Investigating is giving up everything. So basically, so the sort of the physical act of being a monk or something, this is even more important. That is just physically giving up, right?
Yeah, outward renunciation is easy.
It's easy.
If we become disgusted with our life in the world, we can go and sit in a cave in the Himalayas. We can change the color of our cloth. We can change our name. These are all relatively easy things. But giving up ego is the difficult thing. That is what's real renunciation, real surrender is giving up of ego. So simply by changing our name, changing the color of the cloth we wear, shaving our head or growing our beard, this is not renunciation. This is real renunciation is only renunciation of ego. The other renunciation, the outward renunciation, may be appropriate for some people. It may be a help for some people. But all these things, whether our outward life is a life of outward renunciation or a life of so-called worldly activity, having a job, having a family, all these things, these are all outward things. These are all determined by prarabdha. And prarabdha means destiny. Our prarabdha is allotted by Bhagavan for our own spiritual good. So if it were good for us to live the life of a sannyasi, a renunciate, or a monk or something, such a prarabdha would have been given to us. If we don't have such a prarabdha, we don't have to worry about it, because that is not the real renunciation. The real renunciation is only renunciation of, first renunciation of all our likes, dislikes, desires, and attachments. That's the beginning. But it's full renunciation is only renunciation of ego, the one who has likes, dislikes, and so on. We cannot surrender our will to God without surrendering the one who has their will, namely ourself, this ego.
You can do the surrender right here in Houston.
Yes, yes. Real surrender can only be in the heart, here and now.
Yeah. No more. Yeah.
It's easy to understand the terminology and also what renunciation means, but to put it into practice is the difficult part. If there are any how to transcend the difficulties to reach that goal.
This is one thing where we all disagree with Bhagavan. We all say it's very difficult. Bhagavan says it's very easy. So who is right? Are we right or is Bhagavan right? Well, ultimately Bhagavan is right. It seems to us to be difficult. Why?
Is it because since childhood we are groomed to accept the body as I, and it is so ingrained in our brains?
Yeah, but it's not just that. Ultimately, it's a matter of willingness. If we wanted to let go, if we wanted to give up everything, it would be very easy to do. Which is easier, to hold on to something or to let go of it? Letting go is very easy. It takes no effort to let go. It takes effort to hold on. But because if we let go, we'll fall over the cliff, down into the abyss.
Right.
The abyss of pure Satchidananda. We are not yet ready to, we are so attached to our existence as an individual, as a person, and with all our petty pleasures and likes and dislikes and attachments and all these things, even though we know this life is a mixture of pleasure and pain, the pleasures of this life never come in isolation. They're always accompanied sooner or later by pain. Because why worldly experiences, why phenomena give us pleasure? Because of our desire for them. As Bhagavan said, there's no happiness in any of the things of this world. Happiness is our real nature. There's no happiness in any other thing, in any phenomena. There is no happiness. But we seem to derive happiness from phenomena because of our desire for them. Because we desire the phenomena, when we experience them, desire is an agitation of the mind. Desire agitates the mind, makes us restless. When a desire is fulfilled, temporarily, that agitation of the mind, to a certain extent, subsides. We feel pleasure. So, where that happiness comes from, the happiness that comes, that's like the sun sometimes peeping through the clouds. The thoughts are still there. They're not. It's not completely. The root of all thoughts is ego. So long as ego is there, other thoughts are there. So we're not completely thought-free. But a little bit of the happiness, because the agitation of the mind, the thoughts subside to a certain extent. To that extent, we experience pleasure. But if we want to experience that happiness fully, we have to turn back within. But we are not yet convinced that happiness lies only within us. It doesn't lie outside. Why we are not convinced? Because we don't turn within and look. Why we don't turn within and look? Because we're still too attached to other things. So the only problem with surrender, the only problem with letting go, is that we're not yet willing to do so. So Bhagavan is right. This is the easiest of all things, if we want it. Trouble is, we don't yet want it enough. We want other things. So long as we want other things, we are not wanting this sufficiently. Our desire, our love for this, our love for just being as we actually are, for just remaining as pure awareness, has to be all-consuming. It has to consume all other desires.
That will completely overtake you. The love to be ourselves.
Yes, yes.
We just consume the nerves and senses, everything. So
how to get this love?
By practice.
By practice, yes, exactly. But because what we are doing when we're practicing, at every moment we have a choice. Either we can attend to other things or we can attend to ourselves. When we are practicing this self-investigation, we are choosing to try to attend to ourselves. The more we choose to try to attend to ourselves, the more our inclination to attend to other things is weakened, and our inclination to attend to ourselves is strengthened. So it's only by patient, persistent practice that we can cultivate that love, that willingness to be self-attentive. That's why Bhagavan insisted practice is absolutely necessary. Nowadays, there are lots of would-be gurus who try to make it sound, but it's very easy. You come to me and sit in my presence, and I will give you samadhi, and I will tell you that everything is just awareness, and all you have to do is see everything's awareness, and that's the end of. And that's all you've then achieved. There's nothing else to achieve. So you can now call up the search or whatever else jargon, slogans they talk. This is all nonsense. This has nothing to do with real spirituality. Real spirituality requires the renunciation of everything, renunciation of all our likes, our dislikes, and renunciation of the one who has all these likes and dislikes. That is possible only by long, persistent, and patient practice. How all our desires, how we've got these desires, we've cultivated them. A term that is used to describe desires in their seed form is vasanas. These vasanas we've cultivated by countless births of practice. We've cultivated this strong desire and attachment for things other than ourselves. So we've got to wean ourselves away from these desires and attachments, these likes and dislikes. It is possible only by persistent and patient practice. And we have to go on practicing as long as it takes, whether it's in this lifetime or, we don't know how far along the path we are. So this ego may be finished the next moment, or it may be many more years of this lifetime. It may be many lifetimes. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that we try to turn our attention within, and we persevere patiently and persistently.
Well, Michael, I have a question. Basically, I struggle, including the presence of Bhagavan in the creation of our ego. The ego creates all these things and creates also this I thing.
Sorry, I'm not hearing you very clearly because there's too much echo. If you could come a little closer so I can.
Yeah, I'm saying that I struggle, including the presence of Bhagavan, which is the creation of our own ego. Our ego creates all these things. Our ego creates all these things and makes us believe we are not our real self.
Yeah.
So to me, this is like a program. We're born with this program, and the program, including the program includes our birth. So this is like the prarabdha. But this program appears to have like a hiccup, and a real self, to me, takes advantage of this hiccup to present itself to itself. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but the thing is, if our program is focusing on the external things, how come there is this little window there, which is like a reflection of our real self? I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
Okay. Firstly, our real self is not responsible for any of this. Our real self, the nature of our real self is just pure awareness, which is just being. It's not doing anything. So it's not our real self that has created all this. It's we as ego who have created it. So, but this ego doesn't actually exist. It only seems to exist. So, there's no ultimately there's no explanation for all these things. We cannot explain it because Bhagavan said, trying to explain how, but we can explain to a certain extent. But when we rise as ego, we see all this. Therefore, by rising as ego, we are creating all these things. That we can explain to that extent. We cannot explain more than that, because trying to explain more deeply than that is like trying to explain the birth of a barren woman's son. If a woman is barren, she has no son. So a barren woman's son doesn't exist and can never exist. This ego is like the barren woman's son. The ego doesn't actually exist. The whole problem is that because we see other things, we seem to be this ego. So what is the solution? Investigate ourselves. See what is this ego. If we see what is this ego, we will see, but it is nothing but pure awareness, but it had never risen and projected other things. So when people used to ask Bhagavan, why is there Maya? Why does the world exist? Bhagavan said, that's a wrong question. Or why does ego exist? Bhagavan said, that is the wrong question. See whether it exists. Investigate this ego, and if you can find an ego, then bring it to me, and we'll find out how it came into existence. But if you look at it closely enough, you'll see there's no such thing. Then how to explain what doesn't exist?
So is the self barren, Michael?
Sorry?
The self, the true awareness that we are?
Yes.
More. Camera is here.
So is our self barren, like the barren woman? Like it's barren of the ego, it has no existence.
It's barren in the sense that it doesn't produce anything.
So it is barren.
Well, in a sense, yes. In a sense, yes. In the sense that it doesn't produce things, yes. But it's barren sounds very. It's not a very complimentary term to say barren. A barren field is a field that isn't producing any crops. So it's a negative term, barren. But actually, our real nature is the fullness of absolute happiness, infinite happiness. So would you call infinite happiness barren? What we're all looking for, we're all looking for happiness. It doesn't produce anything unreal. It doesn't produce unhappiness. It doesn't produce anything other than itself. What itself is pure, infinite Satchidananda. What more than that do you want? If you want more than that, that's where all troubles start. So from one perspective, we could say our real nature is barren, but that's not a very helpful perspective, because that's seeing it from the point of view of ego, who is valuing all these things. So what is
say that the number of desires are inversely proportional to their happiness?
Yes, but for whom are these desires? Desires will exist so long as we rise as ego. We cannot, there's no such thing as a desireless ego. So let us not be perturbed about these desires. So long as we rise as ego, we will have desires. Of course, we should try to minimize our desires, but ultimately we cannot get rid of our desires without getting rid of ego, the one who has desires. So our focus should be only on, that's why all Bhagavan's teachings are focused only on this ego. Bhagavan does sometimes talk about desires, but he doesn't dwell on desires. For Bhagavan, desires, vasanas, these things, these are thoughts. People say, oh, you have to be thought-free, you have to be this, that. Bhagavan doesn't attach importance to these things. He simply says, investigate this ego, because by investigating ego, we are getting rid of the root desires, thoughts, everything. They're all symptoms. They're all symptoms of what? Of ego. So if we want to get rid of, we're not looking for a symptomatic, we're not trying to treat the symptoms. We need to treat the root cause of the disease. The root cause of the disease is ego. Get rid of ego and you get rid of all these symptoms. So we don't have to, Bhagavan said, people say, I'm a sinner, Bhagavan, how can I be saved? Bhagavan said, Give up the thought that you're a sinner. Investigate yourself. Find out who you are. Persevere in this practice. So we don't have to worry about desires. We don't have to worry about karma. We don't have to worry about sin. We don't have to worry about thoughts. We don't have to worry about anything. Only thing we need to be intent upon is investigating this ego. If we investigate this ego, we're giving up everything. But of course, we shouldn't fool ourselves. We shouldn't pretend that we're investigating ego and continue feeding our desires, because desires are an obstacle, because it's the ego's desires that draw its attention outwards. So we have to give up our desires. But the way to give up our desires, the most effective way to give up our desires, is to investigate ourselves, the ego who has these desires.
And Michael, when we investigate ourselves,
Yes.
so is there only one ego?
Yes.
Okay, so there's only one enemy. So to say.
Yes. Well, we can say ego is like a general, and his army has all his desires, vasanas, likes, dislikes, all these things. So we have to be, Bhagavan says, so long as they're enemies in the thought, they will continue coming out. So we have to cut them down one by one. How we cut them down? Instead of allowing ourselves to be our attention to be dragged away by our desires towards things outside, we have to turn our attention within. That's how we cut down the enemy one by one. Eventually, we'll be able, when the enemy have become so weak, we'll be able to conquer the fort itself and kill the king, the general who's inside. That is ego.
Oh, Michael.
But if we want to bring the war to a quick end, killing the soldiers is a lot of hard work. Try killing the commander-in-chief. You kill the commander-in-chief, then the enemy will surrender. Because they have no existence apart from the commander-in-chief. So we should focus on the commander-in-chief, the ego.
Michael, another concept that I struggle with is the concept of ego. We treat ego and the real self as basically almost two separate entities, like as if they existed independently.
No.
As if it was like good and evil, coexist together, and all of them came from a different source. No, so it's I know it's not like this. But when we express ourselves, we tend to use that kind of terminology that throws me off.
It's very difficult with language to avoid getting caught up in duality. We tend to think in dualistic terms, because this is the way the mind works. But our real nature and ego are one in substance. The difference is a difference in appearance. There are not two things. There's not a rope and a snake. There's only one thing, a rope. The rope seems to be a snake. So there's no snake apart from the rope. And if you look at the snake carefully enough, you'll see that it's just a rope. There never was a snake there. So ego and our real self, they are one in substance. It's only the appearance is different. Ego is just a false appearance. Look at it carefully enough, and you'll see its reality. That's why sometimes people ask Bhagavan, which I am I to investigate, or which self am I to investigate? Should I investigate my real self, or should I investigate ego? Bhagavan said, investigate ego. Why? Because so long as we think there are two things, what we're aware of now is ego. We're not aware of our real nature. We are aware of our real nature, but we're not aware of it as it is. We're aware of it as ego. So all we have to do is investigate ego, But when you look very carefully at the snake, what are you actually looking at? What you're actually looking at is only a rope. So when we're investigating ego, we are investigating our real self. Because it's our real self, our real nature, that appears as ego. So look carefully at ego and you're looking carefully at yourself. If you look carefully enough at your ego, you will see what you really are. It's so simple. Bhagavan's teachings are extremely simple. Our minds are complicated, so we tend to complicate things.
Yes.
But that's why Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu is such a valuable text, because we read it and think about it deeply and understand the basic principles that Bhagavan is teaching us. It's actually all so simple.
Thank you, Michael.
The essence of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, as I say, is this verse 25-26. If we understand these two verses, we've understood the whole of Bhagavan's teachings. We've understood the path of self-investigation. We've understood the path of surrender. We've understood the secret of creation. We've understood all that needs to be understood for following the spiritual path is contained in verse 25 and 26 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu.
So it's only self-fulfilling if we say that this is my prarabdha, so I am subject to all these miseries and adversaries, rather than trying to investigate or self-attend to and be more objective. This is all about ego.
Yeah. Why Bhagavan taught us about prarabdha? In order to make us unconcerned about our outward life, in order to make us unconcerned, what is to happen is going to happen. You cannot do anything to change it. You can try and change it, but you cannot succeed. So, but what we should, the inference we should draw from all that Bhagavan taught us about the whole karma theory that Bhagavan taught us has one purpose and one purpose alone. We shouldn't bother about karma. To make us understand it's not something we should be concerned about. Because what is going to happen is going to happen. So we shouldn't try to change anything. We should be concerned only about one thing. Who am I who's experiencing this prarabdha? Who am I who has all these desires but leads to a gamya, which in turn will go to sanchita and then go to prarabdha. So the whole purpose, people are too caught up in the karma theory that Bhagavan has taught without understanding the purpose of why Bhagavan taught us this. Bhagavan taught us this simply to make us understand we don't have to bother about karma. We don't have to bother about anything. All we have to bother about is, who am I? Prarabdha is already decided. We cannot change it. Why should we bother about what we can't change? What we can change is what is in our hands, is whether we rise as ego or not. Because of our desires and attachments, we continue rising as ego. Investigate this ego, and slowly our desires and attachments will be weakened, and ego will be weakened along with them. And if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, ego will be found to be non-existent. When ego is non-existent, like Bhagavan says, when a husband with 3 wives dies, all 3 wives become widows. So the 3 wives in that context is agamya, the actions we do with desire, sanchita, the store of all the past actions, such actions, the store of the fruits of all such past actions, and prarabdha, those past actions that are now bearing fruit. All these 3 we can get rid of simply by investigating this ego. So we don't have to bother about this karma. It's useful to understand it, because by understanding it, we understand we don't have to bother about it. So there are some people who go on and on and on asking questions about this karma theory. The very fact that we ask questions about it shows we haven't understood it. If we understood it, we would understand we don't have to give it second thought. When we find our mind going outwards, being concerned about our outward life, then it is useful to remember this the karma theory, and to remember that all this is going on according to prarabdha. It cannot be changed. And once we give up, we should give up our concern about this external life. So it's there as an aid, but not something we should become preoccupied with. We should be preoccupied with only one thing: who am I?
So we're helpless, like everything is predetermined, so the only power we have is to investigate who I am, because the rest is already said, so done.
No, that's not the only power you have. You have the power to continue. You can try and change your prarabdha. You've got freedom to try and change your prarabdha. But by trying to change your prarabdha, well, we don't know what our prarabdha is until we experience it, but we are always trying to improve our outward life. We think if this happens, I'll be happier. If this happens, I'll be happier. We're constantly concerned with our outward life, forgetting that this outward life is just a dream and it's going to be over in a brief time. We see people all around us dying, but we believe we're going to continue forever. we know we're not going to continue forever, but we live our life as if we're going to be here forever. So we've got to stop being concerned about these things. So we have the freedom to try to experience things that may or may not be in our prarabdha, or to try to avoid things that may or may not be in our prarabdha. We have that freedom, but that is a wrong use of our freedom. The only correct use of our freedom is to turn within. But in some books, that's been wrongly wrong. The people who recorded some of the books, will record conversations with Bhagavan, misunderstood what Bhagavan was saying. So they recorded as if Bhagavan said, the only freedom you have is to turn within. That's not what Bhagavan meant. The only correct use of your freedom is to turn within. But if our only freedom was to turn within, then we wouldn't be free to do agamya. If we couldn't do agamya, there'd be no fruit, so there'd be no sanchita, no prarabdha. So the whole karma theory is based on the idea we are free to do what we want. We're not free to achieve what we want, but we're free to try to achieve it. But that's a wrong use of our freedom. The only correct use of our freedom is to turn within and surrender at the feet of Bhagavan. To be unconcerned about everything else. That is the only correct use of our freedom. But the fact that we are free to be unconcerned about other things means we're also free to be concerned about them. But by being concerned about them is a recipe for misery. So do we want to be happy or do you want to be miserable? The choice is yours. Bhagavan will not compel us. If you want to be miserable, yes, you're free to be miserable as long as you want to be miserable. Why not? Continue being miserable until you're tired of being miserable. Then if you want to be really happy, this is the path to follow. Bhagavan doesn't compel anyone. Of course, Bhagavan is working within our heart, slowly, slowly giving us the clarity to understand seeking happiness outside ourselves is foolish. So Bhagavan is doing his part, but Bhagavan is a very, very gentle, very gentle gardener. He knows how to nurture a fruit of true love in our heart, and how to remove the weeds one by one to allow the true love to flourish in our heart. The weeds are all our desires, attachments, vasanas.
Michael, have you been able to reach, perhaps not in its totality, but at least partially, this happiness that we are after? So, I mean, this is our goal, and we actually have this dream of eventually reaching it, but it appears to be so far. You know.
I will never be able to reach it. Because in order to reach it, I had to give up this I. The I that wants to reach it has to be given up. If we give up this I, we will find that there's no reaching it because it's already ours. So the I is the obstacle. So to ask whether I have reached it or not is, it's impossible. Ego can never, Michael will never be self-realized. Nor will the ego who says, I am Michael, ever be self-realized. But I am always self-realized. Not Michael, but the real I.
But Michael has to know that.
No, Michael cannot know it. Michael knows nothing. What seems to know things is not Michael, but the ego who says, I am Michael. Because the ego mistakes itself to be Michael, it thinks, I, this person, know things. No person knows anything. What the knower, the person is an object, a phenomenon. The knower of this phenomenon is ego.
And the knower
Ego is often referred to as witness, the sakshi. That which is aware of all these things, that is ego. That is what we need to investigate. But that ego will never know its real nature, because when it tries to know its real nature, it will lose itself in the process. And by losing itself, what will remain is what was always there. That's why Bhagavan said there is nothing to achieve. But there's everything. It's not a matter of achieving anything, but losing everything.
In mathematics,
Giving up ego, investigating this ego is giving up everything. So aim is not to achieve anything, but to lose everything. So anyone who comes to Bhagavan's path hoping that they'll be self-realized, they're sure to be disappointed, because we can never be self-realized. That is, we, the one who is trying to be self-realized, can never be self-realized. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be self-realized. We should try to be self-realized, but we should understand from the beginning that in the process of trying to be self-realized, we will lose ourselves. And what remains is what is always self-realized, which is our own real nature, which is pure self-awareness.
Very good.
So Michael, sorry, so what's it to me? I'm already self-realized. So, I mean, so even if what's it to me? I'm already self-realized. So why even?
You're already self-realized, are you?
I am.
If you're already self-realized, why are you sitting here asking this question?
That's not.
Because the problem is, you are already self-realized, but you seem to be a person.
But why do I care about the person?
What?
Why?
Who cares?
Why do I care about the person?
Why do you care about this person? Because the person seems to be you.
It seems to be, but it's really not me.
It's not me. But there's no point in just saying that.
Right.
You can't get rid of, so long as you see the snake, it's scary. You have to look at it carefully enough to see what it actually is. Then only you can get rid of that fear. Someone may tell you it's just a rope, but to you, until you've seen the rope, you can't be fully convinced. To be fully convinced, you have to see the rope yourself. So merely saying I'm self-realized, what is the use of saying I'm self-realized?
No, not.
I'm self-realized, but I'm still miserable.
Are you asking
If
for
you're happy, you don't need this self-realization. But
there are people who are happy who are not self-realized.
their happiness is only a relative happiness. Nobody is perfectly content. If they were perfectly happy, perfect happiness is possible only when we get rid of ego, because ego is like a cloud that covers our real nature, but obscures the infinite happiness that we actually are. And the very nature of ego is to be dissatisfied. That's the real meaning of the word dukkha. Dukkha means dissatisfaction. Sukha means satisfaction. Satisfaction is our real nature. So long as we're separated from our real nature, we're never actually separated, but so long as we seem to be separated, so long as we rise as ego and are aware of ourselves as a person, we seem to be something other than what we actually are. So we are dissatisfied. So if you want to get rid of dissatisfaction, get rid of the one who is dissatisfied. That is ego. What then remains is your real nature, which is infinite satisfaction. That is why it said the whole purpose of the spiritual path is dukkha nivritti sukha prapti. That is getting rid of dukkha, dissatisfaction, and achieving sukha, satisfaction. But they are not two things. We don't have to achieve satisfaction. All we have to do is get rid of the dissatisfaction, and what remains is satisfaction. The dissatisfaction is ego. The very nature of ego is dissatisfaction. So to get rid of dissatisfaction, we have to get rid of ego. To get rid of ego, we have to investigate it.